The rain tapped softly against the windows of the Anderson family estate as Sophie stood in the study, her hands trembling around a single piece of paper. The eviction notice felt heavier than it should. Its weight pressed into her chest, suffocating. Across the room, Rebecca lounged casually in their late father's favorite leather chair, a smug smile curling on her lips. "Don't worry," Rebecca drawled, inspecting her perfectly manicured nails. "I'm giving you a full month to clear. Out. Dad's will only require 2 weeks, but see? I'm generous." Sophie's knuckles whitened around the paper. The words blurred as anger surged through her veins. Their father, James Anderson, had passed away just 3 weeks ago after a brief, devastating battle with cancer. His loss was still raw. But now this, an eviction notice from her own sister? "I don't understand," Sophie managed, keeping her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "Dad always said he was leaving the house to both of us. He wanted us to share it." Rebecca's eyes rolled dismissively as she leaned back in the chair, crossing her legs elegantly. "People change their minds, Sophie. Dad finally realized which daughter actually deserved his legacy." The study was filled with echoes of their childhood, bookshelves crammed with volumes their father had cherished, the faint scent of his favorite pipe tobacco still lingering in the air. Sophie's gaze swept across the room, landing on the heavy wooden frame of the 1847 map of London hanging on the far wall, her father's sanctuary, now desecrated by Rebecca's arrogance. "When did he make this change?" Sophie asked, though she already suspected the answer. Rebecca's smile widened, her tone syrupy sweet. 3 months ago, right after his diagnosis. He called me over one evening and said he needed to make things right, said he'd been foolish trying to split everything equally when clearly one of us was more capable. Sophie's stomach churned. She remembered that evening vividly. Her father had been heavily medicated, barely coherent. Yet somehow, according to Rebecca, he'd managed to rewrite his entire will. "And the business?" Sophie asked, though dread knotted her gut. Rebecca waved a hand dismissively. "The board already approved my appointment as CEO. After all, I've been running things while you were off playing artist." Sophie bit back a retort. Her playing artist had been the successful operation of a graphic design firm for the past 8 years, but Rebecca had always dismissed it as a hobby. In Rebecca's world, if you weren't wearing a power suit and making people miserable, you weren't really working. Rebecca stood, brushing invisible lint from her designer blazer. "I'll need the keys to the house," she said, holding out her hand. "All copies, please. And don't even think about making extras." Sophie's fingers tightened around the keyring in her pocket. Slowly, she pulled it out and removed the house key she'd carried since she was 12 years old. Her fingers brushed against another key, smaller, older, almost forgotten. The key to their father's private safe. Rebecca didn't know about the safe. Nobody did, except Sophie and their father. He'd shown it to her on her 30th birthday, hidden behind the antique map. "Sometimes a person needs a place for their real treasures," he'd said with a wink. Sophie handed over the house key, watching as Rebecca snatched it from her. Fingers. "I'll have my things out by the end of the month," Sophie said quietly. Rebecca's smile was razor sharp. "Make sure you do. I'm having the locks changed tomorrow anyway, but I'd hate to have to call the police if you overstay." "Oh, you're welcome." Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she made her exit. Sophie stood motionless, listening to the front door slam shut. She counted to 100, ensuring Rebecca was truly gone. Only then did she move. Her heart pounded as she crossed the study to the map of London. Carefully, she lifted the heavy frame, revealing the small wall safe hidden behind it. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Keep this between us." The old key fit perfectly, just as it had countless times before. But this time, Sophie wasn't looking for family photos or childhood mementos. She was looking for the envelope her father had placed inside just days before he died. "Sophie," he had whispered from his hospital bed, pressing the envelope into her hands. "Put this in the safe. Don't tell your sister. Promise me." She had promised. Now, with trembling hands, Sophie retrieved the envelope from behind a stack of old photographs. She hesitated for only a moment before tearing it open. Several documents spilled out onto the desk, and with them, the truth that would change everything. At the top of the stack, in her father's meticulous handwriting, was a single sentence that made Sophie's blood run cold. Evidence of Rebecca's embezzlement from Anderson Global. Estimated total, $2.7 million. The soft hum of conversation filled the grand hall of the James Anderson Foundation's first official gala. Elegantly dressed guests mingled beneath glittering chandeliers, celebrating the launch of a mission dedicated to supporting art education for underprivileged youth. Sophie stood near the entrance, watching as donors, artists, and educators came together for a common cause. Her heart swelled with pride. This was more than just a gala. It was a testament to her father's legacy and a symbol of the company's rebirth. Mark Reynolds approached, a glass of champagne in hand. "Quite the turnout," he remarked with a smile. "You've outdone yourself, Sophie." She laughed softly. "It's not just me. This wouldn't have been possible without you and the entire team." Mark raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Sophie echoed, clinking her glass against his. As the evening progressed, Sophie took the stage. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward her. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate a cause that was very close to my father's heart. The James Anderson Foundation is more than just a philanthropic endeavor. It's a way to honor the values my father instilled in me: creativity, integrity, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to thrive." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "This journey hasn't been easy. We've faced challenges, betrayals, and hard truths. But through it all, we've emerged stronger. And tonight, we look toward a future filled with possibility." Applause erupted, filling the hall with warmth and energy. As Sophie stepped down from the stage, she was met by a familiar face. Rebecca. Dressed simply but elegantly, Rebecca stood, near the edge of the crowd, her expression tentative. It had been months since Sophie had last seen her sister, since the trial and sentencing that had upended both their lives. Rebecca had been granted parole after showing genuine remorse and cooperation during her time in prison. "Sophie," Rebecca said softly. Sophie's heart raced, emotions swirling within her. Anger, hurt, and something resembling hope. "Rebecca," and she acknowledged, keeping her tone measured. There was a long pause before Rebecca spoke again. "I wasn't sure if I should come. I wanted to see it for myself. What you've built." "What we've built," Sophie corrected gently. "Dad's legacy belongs to both of us, no matter what happened." Rebecca's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "For everything." Sophie took a deep breath, the weight of years of pain and betrayal pressing against her. But as she looked at her sister, she saw not the arrogant, power-hungry woman who had tried to take everything, but someone who was trying, truly trying, to be better. "It'll take time," Sophie said honestly, "but I'm willing to try." Rebecca nodded, a flicker of gratitude crossing her face. "Thank you." Later that night, as the gala wound down and guests began to depart, Sophie found herself back in her father's study. The room was just as she'd kept it, a sanctuary filled with memories and meaning. She sat in the leather chair, running her fingers over the smooth surface of the desk. The antique map still hung on the wall, a reminder of secrets uncovered and truths revealed. For a moment, she imagined her father there with her, his reassuring presence filling the room. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "We built something you'd be proud of." The journey had been long and arduous, filled with pain, betrayal, and hard-earned victories. But Sophie knew that this was just the beginning. The foundation, the company, and the family, all were on a path of healing and growth. And as she sat there, bathed in the soft glow of the study's lamp, Sophie understood one simple truth. Legacies weren't just about what you built in life. They were about the strength, love, and resilience you left behind. And that was a legacy worth protecting. The air was crisp as Sophie stepped onto the grounds of the newly renovated Anderson Global headquarters. The building, once a symbol of Rebecca's corrupt reign, now stood as a beacon of hope and renewal. Sunlight reflected off the sleek glass facade, casting vibrant patterns across the pavement. It had been 6 months since Rebecca's sentencing, and the company had undergone a transformation. With Mark's guidance and Sophie's determination, new policies had been implemented to ensure transparency and accountability. Fresh talent had joined the leadership team, bringing innovative ideas and a renewed sense of purpose. Sophie's footsteps echoed through the polished lobby as employees greeted her with warm smiles. The tension that had once gripped the office had dissipated, replaced by an atmosphere of collaboration and optimism. "Morning, Ms. Anderson," a young receptionist chirped. "The board meeting is set to begin in 10 minutes. Sophie nodded. "Thank you." She made her way to the conference room where Mark and the other board members were already seated. The room buzzed with anticipation. Today's agenda was pivotal for the company's future. As Sophie took her seat at the head of the table, Thomas Chang spoke up. "Before we begin, I just want to commend you, Sophie," he said. "Your leadership has been nothing short of remarkable. Anderson Global is stronger than ever." A ripple of agreement swept through the room. "Thank you, Thomas," Sophie said sincerely. "But this success belongs to all of us. We've rebuilt this company together." The meeting commenced, with discussions ranging from new product launches to sustainability initiatives. The highlight, however, was Sophie's announcement of a new philanthropic endeavor, the James Anderson Foundation. This foundation will provide grants for art education programs in underprivileged communities, Sophie explained. "My father believed in the power of creativity and innovation. This is our way of honoring his legacy." Applause filled the room, and Sophie felt a surge of pride. Her little art projects, once dismissed by Rebecca, were now central to a mission that would impact countless lives. Later that evening, Sophie returned to the Anderson estate. The house, once filled with tension and secrets, now radiated warmth and peace. She walked through the familiar halls, memories of her father accompanying her every step. In the study, the antique map still hung on the wall, concealing the safe that had once held the documents that changed everything. Sophie opened it, retrieving the letter from Rebecca. She read it again, the words etched into her memory. "Dear Sophie, I've had a lot of time to think. About Dad, about what I did, about who I became. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I even deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now. Dad chose the right person to protect his legacy. I'm sorry for everything. Rebecca." Sophie folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the safe. Forgiveness was a journey, and while she wasn't sure if she was ready to fully forgive Rebecca, she knew one thing for certain. The door to reconciliation would remain open. Her father had taught her that true strength lay not in dominance, but in compassion and integrity. And Sophie was determined to carry that lesson forward. As she sat in the leather chair, the scent of aged leather and faint traces of pipe tobacco filled the room. Sophie closed her eyes, imagining her father's reassuring presence. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "We protected your legacy." The future stretched before her, bright, promising, and filled with endless possibilities. Sophie knew there would be challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on. After all, the Anderson legacy was built to endure. The city skyline glowed with the hues of early evening as Sophie stood by the window of her father's study, the weight of recent events pressing heavily on her shoulders. Though the company was stabilizing and morale among employees had improved, Sophie knew the final chapter of this ordeal was still unwritten. Rebecca's trial loomed on the horizon, And while Sophie had done everything in her power to ensure Anderson Global's future, justice for their father's legacy demanded one more battle. Mark Reynolds had been thorough. The evidence against Rebecca was airtight. Forged documents, fake consulting firms, offshore accounts, all meticulously catalogued and presented to the authorities. But despite the mountain of proof, Rebecca had pleaded not guilty. "She's banking on her reputation," Mark had explained during one of their strategy meetings. "She thinks her years of influence and connections will sway the court." Sophie's jaw clenched at the memory of Rebecca's arrogance. Her sister had always believed herself untouchable, but Sophie was determined to prove otherwise. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Reporters lined the benches, their pens poised to capture every word. The prosecution laid out its case with precision, painting a damning portrait of Rebecca's betrayal. As Sophie sat quietly near the front, she couldn't help but steal glances at Rebecca. Her sister's usual confidence had faded, replaced by a thin veneer of composure that cracked with every new piece of evidence presented. Bank statements, forged signatures, testimonies from employees who had unknowingly participated in her schemes. Each revelation chipped away at Rebecca's defense, but it was the final witness that sealed her fate, Mark Reynolds himself. "Mr. Reynolds," the prosecutor began, "you were James Anderson's trusted legal advisor for over 2 decades, correct?" "That's correct," Mark confirmed, his voice steady. "And did Mr. Anderson express concerns about his daughter Rebecca's actions before his death?" Mark nodded. "He did. He documented everything, every instance of theft, every forged signature, because he wanted to protect his company and ensure the truth would come to light." Rebecca's lawyer rose for cross-examination, attempting to discredit Mark's testimony, but the damage was done. The truth was irrefutable. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. The judge's gavel struck with finality, echoing through the silent courtroom. Rebecca stood motionless as the sentence was read. 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 4. The weight of justice pressed down on her, stripping away the last remnants of her carefully constructed facade. As the courtroom emptied, Sophie remained seated, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions, relief, sadness, and an unshakable sense of closure. Mark approached her, his expression thoughtful. "It's over," he said quietly. Sophie nodded. It had to be. That evening, Sophie returned to the Anderson estate, now fully hers, according to their father's real will. The house felt different without the shadow of deceit lingering in every corner. She wandered through the familiar halls, memories of happier times mingling with the present. In the study, she found herself drawn to the antique map still hanging on the wall. Behind it lay the safe that had once hidden the secrets that changed everything. Sophie opened it, not to retrieve evidence, but to place something inside. A letter from Rebecca. The shaky handwriting was a far cry from her sister's usual precise script. "Dear Sophie, I've had a lot of time to think about Dad, about what I did, about who I became. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I even deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now. Dad chose the right person to protect his legacy. I'm sorry for everything. Rebecca." Sophie folded the letter carefully and placed it alongside the other family documents. Forgiveness would take time, if it ever came. But this letter was a part of their story now, a testament to growth and accountability. As she sat in her father's leather chair, the future stretched out before her, uncertain but filled with possibilities. Anderson Global would thrive, not just as a business, but as a symbol of resilience and integrity. And Sophie would ensure that her father's true legacy endured. The aftermath of Rebecca's arrest reverberated through Anderson Global like an earthquake. Whispers and speculations spread among employees like wildfire. For years, Rebecca had been a commanding force, a symbol of power and control. Now, that symbol had shattered. Sophie stood in her father's study, the familiar scent of aged books and faint traces of pipe tobacco grounding her in the midst of the chaos. The leather chair, Rebecca's self-declared throne, was empty now, a reminder that justice had finally been served. The company's future lay in Sophie's hands, but the path forward was fraught with challenges. Mark Reynolds had made that clear during their meeting earlier that morning. "This isn't just about Rebecca," Mark had said, his tone serious. "The board is shaken. Investors are nervous. We need to move quickly to stabilize the situation." Sophie had nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "What's our next step?" she had asked. "A forensic audit is underway," Mark had explained. "We're documenting every instance of fraud and theft. But we also need to rebuild trust with the board, the employees, and the public." Now, standing in the study, Sophie knew what had to be done. Her father's legacy was more than just a company. It was a testament to integrity, hard work, and resilience, and she was determined to honor that legacy. The following week, Sophie called an emergency meeting with the Anderson Global Board of Directors. The tension in the room was palpable as the members took their seats, their expressions a mix of concern and skepticism. Sophie took a deep breath before speaking. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I know recent events have shaken our company to its core. Rebecca's actions were a betrayal, not just to our family, but to every employee and stakeholder who believed in this company." Murmurs rippled through the room, but Sophie pressed on. "My father built Anderson Global on a foundation of trust and integrity. We lost sight of that under Rebecca's leadership, but I'm here to tell you that we will restore what was broken." Thomas Chang, the head of the board, leaned forward. "And how do you propose we do that?" he asked, his tone measured. "Transparency," Sophie replied without hesitation. "Effective immediately, we'll be conducting a full audit of our financials. I've brought in a team of forensic accountants to ensure that every dollar is accounted for. We will also be implementing new financial controls to prevent this kind of fraud from ever happening again." The board members exchanged glances, their skepticism softening slightly. "Additionally," Sophie continued, "I propose the creation of an ethics committee to oversee all major financial decisions. This committee will include representatives from the board, senior management, and an independent third party." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That's a strong start," he admitted. "But what about morale? The employees need to know that the company is stable and that their jobs are secure." Sophie smiled faintly. "I've already scheduled a company-wide meeting for tomorrow morning. I'll address the employees directly, answer their questions, and assure them that we're moving forward stronger than ever." As the meeting continued, Sophie felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was daunting, but she was ready to face it head-on. The next morning, the company auditorium was packed with employees. Their faces reflected a mix of anxiety and hope. Sophie stood on the stage, the spotlight warm against her skin. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "I know the past few weeks have been incredibly difficult. You've heard the rumors, and I'm here to tell you the truth." The room fell silent. "Rebecca Anderson violated the trust of this company and its people," Sophie said plainly. "Her actions were unacceptable, and justice is being served. But this company is bigger than one person. Anderson Global was built by all of you, your hard work, your dedication, and your belief in our mission." A few nods rippled through the crowd. "We're implementing changes to ensure that this never happens again," Sophie continued. "But more importantly, we're moving forward. Together, your jobs are secure, our mission remains the same. And I promise you this, Anderson Global will not just survive this crisis, we will thrive." The room erupted into applause, a wave of relief and renewed hope washing over the employees. As Sophie stepped off the stage, Mark approached her, a rare smile on his face. "Well done," he said. Your father would be proud. Sophie nodded, emotion tightening her throat. This is just the beginning, she said. We're going to build something even stronger. And as she walked through the crowd, shaking hands and offering words of encouragement, Sophie knew that her father's legacy was safe. Not just because of the changes being implemented, but because of the resilience and strength of the people who believed in it. The air in the Anderson Global boardroom was thick with tension. The walls, lined with gleaming mahogany panels, seemed to hum with anticipation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but Sophie barely noticed the bustling skyline. She sat at the far end of the long conference table, her pulse thrumming in her ears. At the head of the table, Rebecca commanded the room with her usual poise. Dressed in a tailored navy blue power suit, she shuffled a stack of papers, as though the weight of the company rested solely on her shoulders. Her voice was smooth and confident as she addressed the assembled board members. Now that everyone's here, Rebecca began, I'd like to discuss our 5-year growth strategy. Anderson Global is positioned for unparalleled success. Actually, Mark Reynolds interrupted, rising from his seat near Sophie. His calm but authoritative tone cut through Rebecca's polished speech like a knife. There's been a change to the agenda. Rebecca's perfectly penciled eyebrows drew together in confusion. Excuse me, she said sharply. I set the agenda and I don't recall. Mark continued as if she hadn't spoken. The first item is the matter of James Anderson's will. The real one. A murmur rippled through the boardroom. Sophie watched as Rebecca's face paled, the confident veneer slipping just enough for Sophie to see the flicker of panic beneath. This is ridiculous, Rebecca snapped, forcing a smile. We've already been through this. The will was read weeks ago. That will, Sophie said quietly, speaking for the first time, was a forgery. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. Mark began distributing copies of the authentic will, along with the extensive evidence his forensic team had compiled. Board members leaned forward, examining the damning documents in disbelief. Thomas Chang, the head of the board, adjusted his glasses as he skimmed through the pages. His expression grew increasingly grim. These are serious allegations, he said gravely. Miss Anderson, do you have any explanation for these discrepancies? Rebecca's composure cracked. This is absurd, she spat, her voice rising. Sophie's just jealous because Dad chose me to run the company. She's always been jealous of my success. Sophie couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, hollow sound. Success? Is that what you call stealing nearly $4 million from the company? Rebecca shot to her feet, knocking over her chair. I built this company, she shrieked. While you were playing with your little art projects, I was here every day, making the hard decisions. Mark remained unflappable. Like the decision to create fake consulting firms to funnel money into your personal accounts, he asked mildly, sliding another document across the table. Or the decision to forge your father's signature on international wire transfers. Rebecca's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal, searching for an ally, an escape route. Anything, but she found only shocked and disgusted faces. Dad knew, Sophie said softly. He documented everything, but instead of turning you in, he protected you right until the end. He was trying to give you a chance to change. Rebecca's voice cracked. Then why are you doing this now? Sophie met her gaze steadily. Because you couldn't stop. Even after he died, you forged his will, tried to steal my inheritance, and planned to keep bleeding the company dry. Thomas Chang cleared his throat, his tone heavy with authority. The police are waiting in the lobby, he announced. Mr. Reynolds has already provided them with copies of all documentation. Rebecca collapsed back into her chair, the weight of her actions finally crashing down upon her. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling piece by piece. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice hollow. I'm your sister. Yes, you are, Sophie said, rising from her seat. And you always will be. But Dad trusted me to protect his legacy, the real one, not the empire you tried to build on lies and theft. As the police entered the boardroom and placed Rebecca in handcuffs, silence fell over the room. Sophie stood by the window, looking out at the city below, the same view Rebecca had once loved, the one she thought proved her superiority. Now it was Sophie's turn to reclaim what truly mattered. The reckoning was complete, but the journey was far from over. The dim light of early dawn filtered through the heavy curtains of Sophie's room as she sat at the desk, staring at the documents spread out before her. Sleep had eluded her. The revelation from her father's safe was impossible to push from her mind. Evidence of Rebecca's embezzlement, $2.7 million. Sophie's breath caught every time she reread that damning sentence. It wasn't just about the money. It was the betrayal, the audacity, the years of deceit carried out under their father's nose. Her father, the man who had built Anderson Global from the ground up, who had trusted Rebecca even in his final days. Now Sophie held the truth in her hands. Determination hardened her features. She wasn't going to let Rebecca get away with this, but she knew she couldn't confront her sister head-on. Not yet. Sophie needed help, someone she could trust implicitly. There was only one person who fit that description: Mark Reynolds, her father's oldest friend and the family's longtime lawyer. Sophie picked up her phone, fingers shaking slightly as she dialed Mark's number. The line rang twice before his familiar gravelly voice answered. Mark Reynolds speaking. "Mark, it's Sophie," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to see you. It's about Dad's will, the real one." There was a pause on the other end. "Come to my office, now." Mark's office had remained unchanged for decades. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and a slightly crooked painting of a sailing ship adorned the room. It was a place steeped in tradition and trust. He greeted Sophie with a firm handshake and a concerned look. "What's going on, Sophie?" Without a word, she placed the documents on his desk. Mark's brows furrowed as he examined them, his expression growing darker with each passing minute. "This is extraordinary," he finally said, looking up from the papers. James documented everything meticulously. The forged signatures, the fake accounts, even the offshore transfers. He didn't miss a detail. Sophie nodded, her voice tight. He knew what Rebecca was doing, but he never confronted her. He just kept records. Mark leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "We have two options. We can go straight to the police with this evidence of both the forged will and the embezzlement. Or," he paused, studying her face, "we can handle this more strategically." Sophie's mind raced. The image of Rebecca's smug smile as she handed over the eviction notice flashed before her eyes. The years of dismissive comments, belittling her work, stealing not just money, but their father's legacy. "Tell me about strategic," she said. Mark's expression sharpened. "First, we quietly file your father's real will with the probate court and request a delay in processing. This will freeze any irreversible decisions Rebecca tries to make about the estate. Then we conduct a full forensic audit of Anderson Global's finances. I'll bring in accountants I trust, people who know how to be discreet." "And then?" Sophie asked. "Then we move fast," Mark said grimly. "When the time comes, we'll have everything we need to bring her down." Sophie's resolve hardened. "Let's do it." Over the next 2 weeks, Sophie played her part perfectly. She packed boxes, made a show of preparing to move out, and even forced herself to smile politely when Rebecca stopped by to check on her progress. But behind the scenes, Mark's team was working tirelessly. Every day brought new revelations, hidden accounts, fake consulting firms, fraudulent transfers. The numbers were staggering. Beyond the $2.7 million her father had documented, they uncovered another million hidden in shell companies. Rebecca hadn't just been stealing. She'd built an entire shadow operation within the company. 15. Days after receiving the eviction notice, Mark called Sophie. "We're ready," he said simply. "The board meets tomorrow at 10 a.m. Be there." Sophie's heart pounded. The moment of reckoning was near.